Jane counted the boards on the ceiling above her narrow cot and decided that pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. 3 weeks since the bank's letter arrived. 2 weeks since she understood what it meant. 1 morning, this morning, since she admitted she needed help the way a drowning woman needs a hand, not a lecture about swimming. The homestead her father built on the Montana high plains was solid enough in its bones. Good timber walls, a stone chimney that drew clean, 80 acres of grass that fattened cattle beautifully when the seasons were kind. But the seasons had not been kind, and her father was gone, and the note on the land was due in April. She was 29 years old, a woman alone on a claim the county assessor had already begun eyeing with the particular hunger of men who believed land without a man on it was land waiting to be taken. She had placed the advertisement herself in 3 newspapers, written in the plainest language she could manage. She was not romantic about it. She had never been romantic about much of anything, not since she was 16, and learned that romance was a story people told themselves while the real work went undone. The advertisement read as follows: Widow, 29, seeks capable man for working arrangement on cattle claim, Montana Territory, separate rooms, shared labor, fair terms. No romantic expectations required. Reply in writing to Box 14, Harlow Station. She received 11 replies. 9 she discarded immediately. 2 on account of handwriting so poor she doubted the men could read a fence line. The rest on account of language that made clear they had not read the advertisement carefully, or had read it and chosen to believe she did not mean what she said. 1 reply came from a preacher in Billings who suggested she might benefit more from prayer than partnership, and she set that one aside with a patience she was proud of. The 11th letter she read 4 times. It was from a man named Elias Croft. It was brief. It was legible. It began, "I understand the terms and I accept them." That was when the winter began. Elias Croft stepped off the afternoon stage at Harlow Station on a Tuesday in late October, and Jane recognized him before he said a word because he was the only man on the platform who was looking at the land instead of the people. He had a canvas pack on his back and a bedroll strapped below it, and the kind of stillness in his face that either meant a man was at peace or meant he had stopped expecting much. She suspected both were true. He was tall but not imposing, broad through the shoulders in the way of someone who earned it rather than inherited it, and there were threads of gray at his temples that she had not anticipated from his letter, though she could not have said why she had imagined otherwise. She walked to him directly. She was not a woman who lingered. "Mr. Croft," she said. He turned. "Miss Alderman." "It's Mrs.," she said, not unkindly. "I was married briefly before. He passed. I kept the name for the claim documents." "Mrs. Alderman," he corrected without hesitation, no stumble in it, no pity in his eyes she would have had to manage. "Thank you for the stage fare." "It comes out of the first month's wage," she said. "I wrote that in the follow-up letter." "You did," he agreed. "I remember." She studied him for a moment. The wind came down off the northern ridge the way it always did at this hour, sharp and personal, and he did not flinch from it. She took that as useful information. "I'll tell you the terms again, face to face, so there's no confusion later," she said. "The east room is yours. The main room and kitchen are shared. I cook in the mornings. You're responsible for wood and water. We split the heavier cattle work by what we're each capable of. No questions about my business unless it touches the claim. Same courtesy I'll extend to you." He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man deciding, she sensed, but the quiet of a man being thorough. "That's the same as the letter," he said. "Yes. Then I agreed to it before and I agree to it now." She picked up her side of nothing, because she had come in the wagon and he had all the luggage, and she walked toward the livery where it was hitched. He followed without being told. She did not know precisely what she had expected from this moment, but she found, to her own mild surprise, that nothing about it disappointed her. The first 3 days, they operated like two careful strangers, sharing a train compartment, polite and precise and watchful. Jane was up before light each morning, oats on by the time the sky grayed, and she set his bowl across the table without ceremony, and he ate it without comment, which suited them both. He took to the woodpile like a man settling an old debt, splitting a week's worth in the first afternoon, stacking it with a neatness she had not asked for but found herself noticing. He did not whistle. He did not make small talk. These were things she appreciated in a man doing shared work in a small space. On the 4th morning she came in from checking on the cattle to find that he had mended the hinge on the cellar door that had been sticking since August. He had not asked permission and he had not mentioned it. She stood in the doorway and looked at the door swinging clean and easy on its new pin, and she felt something loosen in her chest that she promptly identified as simple relief at one less problem. She did not say thank you. He did not seem to expect it. But the next morning she made extra biscuits and set 4 on his side of the table instead of the usual 2. He looked at the biscuits. Then he looked at the door. Then he went back to eating. Neither of them mentioned it aloud, but a vocabulary had been established. The cold arrived properly in the 2nd week of November, earlier than the almanac had suggested, and angrier than Jane had anticipated. The mercury dropped to 17 below on a Thursday, and she found Elias already at the barn before she reached it, breaking ice on the water troughs with a methodical rhythm that told her he had done this before, in some previous winter, in some previous life he had not described to her and she had not asked about. The cattle moved close to him without fear. She found that notable. Animals, in her experience, read men accurately. By December, they had settled into something that was neither friendship nor mere transaction, but occupied a territory between the two that Jane had no name for, and did not try to name. He had built a second shelf in the kitchen without being asked because the one shelf was too crowded, and she had begun leaving the lamp burning later in the evenings so there was light when he came in from his last check of the barn. Neither of them acknowledged these adjustments. Both of them noticed. One evening in the 2nd week of December, a storm came down from Canada that the Plains people knew to respect, not with fear but with the quiet gravity you gave to anything large enough to kill you if you were careless. The wind hit the walls with a sound like a fist, and Jane sat at the table with the account ledger open before her and tried to make April's numbers work. They did not work. She had been trying to make them work for 2 months. She heard Elias come in from the barn, heard him knock the snow from his boots at the door the way he always did, 3 deliberate stamps, and she did not look up from the ledger, but she was aware of him moving into the room behind her, of the small sounds of him pulling off his coat and hanging it on the peg by the door. "The north fence is holding," he said. "Good," she said. She heard him build up the fire, adding 2 large pieces of wood with the economy of motion she had come to associate with him, the way he did everything, no waste, no flourish, just the thing done exactly as well as it needed to be done. He sat down in the chair across from the fire and was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "The numbers aren't there." She looked up at him then. He was looking at the fire. "You've been at that ledger every night this week," he said. "I'm not asking about your business. I'm saying I can see the problem from where I sit." She closed the ledger. She thought about Pride and about the winter of her father's last illness, when Pride had cost them a neighbor's help and 3 cattle besides. "The note is $460, she said. "I have $290. He was quiet. "The spring calves would cover it if everything goes right," she said. "But everything has to go right. How many head are you expecting?" 14 if I'm lucky, maybe 12. He was still looking at the fire. She watched the side of his face and tried to read it, and could not, which was unusual for her. "I have $140 in a postal account in Billings," he said finally. "I won't call it a loan. It's a share. You put me on the deed as hired hand and we settle up in the spring from the calf sales." Jane looked at him for a long time. "You'd put $140 into a claim that isn't yours," she said. "I'd put $140 into a claim I'm working," he said. "That's different." She thought about 11 letters, and about the one that had said, "I understand the terms and I accept them." She thought about hinges and biscuits and shelves and lamp oil. "I'll think on it," she said. He nodded once and said nothing further. She opened the ledger again, but she was not seeing the numbers anymore. She told him yes the following morning, over oats, in 2 sentences, and he nodded the same way he had nodded the night before, and they ate in the silence that was not unfriendly, and then he went out to the cattle. The trouble came in January, wearing the face of a man named Garrett Finch. Finch ran a land and cattle company out of Billings that had been absorbing homestead claims along the valley for 3 years, always within the law, or the edges of it, always when a widow or a debtor or a drought-broken family ran short of options. He arrived at Jane's gate on a gray Wednesday behind a team of matching bays, dressed too well for the cold and smiling the kind of smile that had been practiced in a mirror. He said he'd heard the Alderman place might be coming available in the spring. He said he was prepared to offer a fair price, settlement on the note, and enough left over that a woman alone might relocate somewhere more comfortable. Jane stood on her porch in her heavy coat and looked at Garrett Finch and said, "The Alderman place is not coming available." He shifted his weight in a way that was meant to look casual and was not. "Times are hard, Mrs. Alderman. A woman managing 80 acres without..." "Without what?" The voice came from behind her and to the right. From the corner of the porch she had not realized Elias was standing on. He had come around from the barn, and she had not heard him, and neither, clearly, had Finch, who stopped speaking mid-sentence. Elias stepped up to stand at the porch rail, not beside Jane but adjacent to her, and he looked down at Finch with the same expression he had worn looking at the land the first day she saw him. Entirely present, entirely still, and containing something that Finch could apparently read more clearly than she could from the side. "I was speaking to Mrs. Alderman," Finch said. "I know," Elias said. "I heard what you were speaking. The claim is not available." He let a pause sit in the cold air. "Ride on." It was not loud. It was not a threat in any form she could have named to the law. But Finch looked at him for 3 full seconds and then gathered his reins. "This conversation isn't finished," Finch said. "It is for today," Elias said. The matching bays took Finch back down the road, and Jane stood on the porch watching until he was gone. Then she turned to look at Elias, who was still watching the road himself, his jaw set in a way she had not seen before. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "You were handling it fine," he said. "I was there in case you wanted backing." She thought about that distinction for a moment. Then she said, "I'm glad you were there." He turned to look at her and something shifted in his expression, barely, briefly, the way the surface of still water shifts when something moves below it. Then he nodded and went back around to the barn. Finch did not come back that week, but he sent a letter with a second offer, higher than the first, and after that he sent a man from his company office to speak to the assessor in Harlow about an irregularity in the Alderman Claims Boundary Survey. Jane heard about the assessor visit from the storekeeper, a sharp-eared woman named Mrs. Pratt who considered it her civic duty to track every piece of news that moved through the county. Jane took the news home in her coat pocket like a stone and set it on the table between herself and Elias after supper. They talked for 2 hours. Elias knew something about survey law from a previous stretch of work with a railroad survey team that he mentioned without elaboration, and she did not press. He believed the original survey markers were still in place. He had seen fence posts with filed brass tacks in them that matched the original claim documentation. If Finch's man found anything irregular, it would be manufactured. and manufactured things could be answered. They rode out the next morning together, in the cold, and spent 4 hours on horseback tracing the boundary fence while Elias noted every marker in a small notebook he kept in his breast pocket. By noon they had everything they needed. Jane felt the stone in her pocket become something lighter. Not gone. Finch was not gone, but answerable, which was different. On the ride back, with the horses moving easy through the frozen grass, she said, "Where were you before you answered the advertisement?" He was quiet for a moment, and she remembered she had told him no questions, so she started to say so didn't matter, but he spoke before she did. "Wyoming," he said. "Worked for a ranch outfit for 4 years. Foreman left, owner's son took over, and had different ideas about how the place ought to run. I had different ideas from his." He paused. "Before that, a survey team. Before that, a cattle drive up from Texas. Before that," he stopped. "Before that was a long time ago." She did not press, but she understood that the before that contained something heavy, and she let it rest where he had said it. They ate supper late that night, and the fire was good, and the wind had quieted. After a while, Elias said, "You've been on this place alone for how long?" It was not quite a question. 2 years, she said. "My husband was here 1 year before that. He was not," she considered her words, "he was not unkind. He was just not here in any way that mattered. When he died, there was mostly the relief that I didn't have to arrange my life around a person who was already mostly absent." Elias looked at the fire. "I understand that kind of arrangement," he said, and she felt with certainty that he meant it. "Were you married?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "She left, not to someone else. She left to a city, back east, and she was right to go. We wanted different things, and neither of us had the words to say so until it was past the point of mending." He paused. "That was the before that." The fire shifted and settled. Outside, the Montana night was absolute in its cold silence. Jane said, "The terms of our arrangement don't have a clause for this kind of conversation." "No," he said. "I think I want to add one," she said. "Not in writing." He looked at her then, directly for the first time in a while, and the expression on his face was the one she had seen in pieces, in the careful way he moved through a shared space, in the second shelf, in the $140, gathered now into something plain and readable. "I'd agree to that," he said. It was not a declaration. It was what it was. Two careful people acknowledging that the contract they were living inside had already changed its shape, the way a house settles in its first winter and is stronger for it. Jane understood this and did not try to make it into something else. She simply let it be true and went to bed, and for the first time in 2 years she did not count the boards on the ceiling. February came hard and receded harder, and by the time the snow began to soften at the edges of the south-facing slope, something between Jane and Elias had grown so naturally that she could not have pointed to the moment it changed, only to the fact of its existence. He had moved his small reading chair closer to the lamp without asking, and she had begun leaving a cup of coffee on the counter for him without being asked. And these arrangements occupied the same unspoken vocabulary as the biscuits and the hinge, only deeper in the grammar now. The spring survey challenge from Finch's man came and went. Elias presented the boundary notebook to the county assessor himself, in person, and the assessor, a slow-talking man named Gebhardt who respected precision, found the documented markers satisfactory and closed the inquiry. Finch sent no further letters. The calves came in March, 14 of them, which was the lucky number, every one of them vigorous and healthy in a way that felt like the land offering an opinion on how the winter had gone. Jane stood in the barn on the morning the last one arrived, watching it find its feet in the clean straw, and Elias was standing beside her, and she was aware of his shoulder 2 inches from hers, and the warmth coming off him against the cool barn air. and she was aware of being entirely unafraid of that warmth, which was new. 14, she said. 14, he said. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. The terms of the original arrangement, she said, specified separate rooms and shared work and no questions. They did, he said. We've broken 2 of those, she said, the questions. We have, he agreed. She looked at him for a moment with the particular steadiness she brought to everything she intended to be certain of. I would like to renegotiate, she said. He was still, that thoroughness again, the quality she had catalogued since October. Not hesitation, not fear, but a man being complete in his consideration. What are the new terms? He said. Shared rooms, she said. Shared work. All the questions we want. She let that sit in the barn air for a moment. Same claim, different understanding of what we're building. Elias looked at her with the expression she had learned to read over a winter's worth of small, honest gestures. The one that meant he was about to say exactly what he meant, no more and no less. I'd like to go into town and speak with the preacher, he said. Jane allowed herself a small smile, the kind she did not produce often, because it meant something when it appeared. The assessor's office would accept a signed amendment to the deed naming you as co-holder, she said. That might come before the preacher. It might, he said. He was almost smiling now himself, that careful version of it she had watched develop over 4 months. It might come first thing Monday. Then the preacher on Tuesday, she said. Then the preacher on Tuesday, he agreed. She turned back to the calf, who had found its feet completely now, and was pressing its nose into its mother's flank with cheerful insistence. The barn was warm with the particular warmth of living animals, and clean hay, and morning light coming through the high window. She was aware, with a quietness that felt like certainty, that she was not drowning anymore, that she was, in fact, standing on ground that was hers and held, and that the man beside her had helped her hold it not by rescuing her, but by standing alongside her and working, which was the only kind of help worth keeping. She did not count boards that night either, nor any night that followed. The east room gained a second wardrobe, and the shared room gained a longer curtain rod, and the kitchen table gained a jar of early prairie flowers that neither of them mentioned placing there, though it stayed all the same. The deed was amended on a Monday in late March. The ceremony with the preacher, a brisk and honest man who asked no unnecessary questions and seemed genuinely pleased to be doing something of substance on a Tuesday, was attended by Mrs. Pratt from the general store, who wept in a fashion entirely disproportionate to her reputation for hardness, and told everyone in Harlow about it for a month. April came, and with it the note's due date, and with it the sale of the calves, and the numbers on the ledger aligned themselves into a shape that Jane sat with for a long time, in the good silence of an evening earned. There are people who will tell you that love born from practicality is somehow less than love born from passion. You sit with that idea a while. Jane Alderman and Elias Croft made a bargain with their eyes open, each one carrying a load of grief and a necessary pride, and the kind of stubbornness that keeps people alive on the high plains when the winter comes early and the mercury drops to 17 below. They did not fall into love like it was an accident. They built it the way you build a good fence, post by post, steady, checking the line, making sure it would hold. What grew between them was not a rescue, it was a renegotiation, and that is something finer. If you know someone who has ever turned a practical arrangement into a genuine life, leave a word about them in the comments tonight. This story is as much theirs as it is Jane's and Elias's. If this kind of tale speaks to your heart, subscribe and stay close. We have more journeys from the old frontier waiting for you. Good night. God bless you and the people you've chosen to build with.